Hello everyone, welcome to the Linguist Library. Today we're talking about the biggest classics that I think are worth your time. But first things first, don't forget to like and subscribe if languages and literature are your jam. Now, if you grew up reading fantasy, you're thinking, I like big books. I grew up reading big books. So did I. But to give you an idea of just how big these books are, comparatively, let's take a look at The Order of the Phoenix, which is the biggest of the Harry Potter books. That one has about 250,000 words. Because here's the thing, if you ever worked in the industry, you know that we measure things by word count and not necessarily by page, because it really depends on the font size. You can fit a lot into a page depending on the font size. So we go by word count. And by we, I mean translators, writers, journalists, anybody who works with words. So also for comparison, since I wrote it down, Midnight Sun, which is the biggest book from the Twilight Saga, is 240,000 words. And for this list, I have chosen 10 books and a couple of honorary mentions that have at least a grand total of 300,000 plus. The majority of them have over 400,000 words. So, are we in for a treat? We really are, to be honest with you. So the first book on my list that I think everyone should read is Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. Now, Don Quixote de la Mancha is in fact considered the first romance. And it is, I would say, one of the most important literary works of the Western canon, if not the world. And I just think that this is, I wouldn't say it's a misunderstood classic, because I think enough people have read it to know that it is in fact quite approachable and super fast-paced and just endearing. It's an endearing read. You want to spend more time with Cervantes. And it looks daunting because, I mean, look at the size of that puppy. This is my Spanish edition, and I am reading some commentary on it lately, and I cannot get enough of Cervantes' wit, his sarcasm, in the way that he sees knights and in the way that people of his time, which was the peak of the Spanish Empire, if you will, or the Conquistador era, and then the way that he made fun of his own society. Honestly, it's exquisite and absolutely should read it. You won't feel the words. You won't feel the amount of words. If you're curious, this book has 430,000 words, a little over 430,000 words. Now, the second book on my list that I absolutely think is worth your time, despite its size, is Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. Now, you probably heard about the movie, and if you have, then you know what I'm talking about. Our beautiful Southern belle, Scarlett O'Hara, during the American Civil War, is fighting for her family and for herself. And there's nothing as gripping as her saga. Honestly, I was enamored by this from the first time I read it, and I still am to this day. It is definitely a reread for me. Now, the third book on my list, and possibly the one with the fastest pace, despite it being one of the biggest, even bigger than Don Quixote, is The Count of Monte Cristo. Now, The Count of Monte Cristo has a grand total of 464,000 words, which is a lot of words, but it is a tale of revenge, and it's a tale of love and of the fantastic resilience of our main character. We follow him from the time that he's banished to the island, and all of his possessions and his love stolen from him to the time that he gets back to mainland France. And this is just a fantastic journey. Now, I remember at the time when I read The Count of Monte Cristo, I couldn't get enough of it. And one thing led to another. And I ended up picking up Papillon, which I have a physical copy of. But Papillon by Henri Charrière is a nonfiction that kind of feels like The Count of Monte Cristo, because even though it is a very different tale, and again, nonfiction, Papillon, much like Monte Cristo, the main character of Papillon, which is Henri himself, because this is nonfiction, is falsely accused of a crime and sent to a penal colony. In this case, Henri is sent to French Guiana in South America. And you just get to see him trying to escape prison multiple times. So this is another fast-paced, fairly big book that I also recommend if you're going to read The Count of Monte Cristo, or if you already read The Count of Monte Cristo and you enjoyed it, you're definitely going to enjoy this. Now, moving on to our next book. We have at number 4, and I only have part 1 with me here for the video, The Lord of the Rings. Now, The Fellowship of the Ring is the first part of J.R.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings epic fantasy. This happens to be probably one of the first mainstream epic fantasies. No. So J.R.R. Tolkien took a lot of inspiration from Beowulf, including, first and foremost, his vocabulary and the words that he used. From the Lord of the Rings itself, the very expression, the Lord of the Rings, which was used many times to refer to Beowulf in the original epic poem from the 8th century, written in Old English. But also words like Middle-earth and a lot of his, I would say his world building, but also just the feel of his epic poem. And this epic fantasy, The Lord of the Rings, happens to be, as a linguist, one that lives very, very close to my heart, because the genius of J.R.R. Tolkien, when he was deciding the languages that each cast of his characters would use, is just astonishing. The language, the Black Uruk language, which has a large quantity of really ugly sounding sounds to the human ear, the beautiful angelical elvish language. I cannot recommend The Lord of the Rings enough. Not that it needs more hype, because, well, it's The Lord of the Rings. I mean, you know. Okay, so book number 5 in my really, really big classics is probably the latest addition to my list. And I only read this last year, talking about War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This fantastic Russian epic is set during the Napoleon invasion of Russia, and it follows a vast group of characters, 5 aristocratic families to be specific, and we see them from the time that they're young people to the time that the war finishes. And this grand saga really had me rethinking my view and everyone's view, especially historians' perception and portrayal of history. How do we portray history? Should we really be calling men like Napoleon great? But anyway, so at number 6, we have another immense classic that everyone should read. And I have been trying to read the entire thing for a while. I'm going to do it this year. I've already started reading it in French. And I'm talking about Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Now, Les Miserables follows a cast of characters during the French Revolution. And I wouldn't say that Jean Valjean is perhaps one of the unluckiest men in France ever. But the title probably gives it away. So we're looking at a group of people that are growing through some really terrible things. Some would say that they're miserable. I would say Victor Hugo thought so. But despite its size, Les Miserables will teach you so much about France and so much about Paris and so much about the French spirit and the French Revolution that it is probably one of my favorite reads of all time. And it is beautifully embellished with Judeo-Christian values that you find in the best Western works. Now, moving on to Middlemarch. This is probably one of the smallest of my list, one of the smallest novels in terms of word count. This is, I think, a little under 350,000 words, and it is written by the amazing George Eliot. Now, she wrote this novel in 2 parts, and I think the first part is quite possibly, and I'm not the first person to describe it this way, but quite possibly the best and the most beautifully constructed paragraphs of the English language. I've heard a YouTuber refer to it as the voice of God, and I can understand that statement. Especially the first part of this novel. You will find that the way she plays with syntax, she was a polyglot, George Eliot that is, and the way that she merged German syntax with English just made this novel a beautiful masterpiece, in my opinion. So, if anything, read it for the language. Now, at number 8, I have an American classic that I think everyone should read. Although I understand that this one is a bit of an acquired taste. But if you enjoyed The Count of Monte Cristo and you're into revenge, a good revenge, then maybe you enjoy this. I'm talking about Moby Dick, and this is about a saga of a man who is looking for a white sperm whale that bit off half his leg. And I think it is one of those that really show how humans can be persistent against all odds and against much bigger opponents. Now, before we get to the last 2 novels of my list, I would like to mention a few books that aren't necessarily classics, but they are fantastic and they should definitely be in the spotlight, even if it's just for a tiny little while. One of them is this series. I'm going to show you one, but the whole series is amazing. So The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest is part of the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series. And despite its size, it is one of those fast-paced thrillers that you plow through. You fly through. I love this heroine. I love this crime fiction series. I think that he writes crime fiction in the way that it should be, fast-paced. And despite his many legal and criminal rants, it still feels like it's exactly the size that it should be. So The Girl with the The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest are probably my favorite, but anything by Larsson is pretty good if you really want to know. That also takes me to Anna Karenina, which is another novel by Leo Tolstoy, not quite as big as War and Peace, but definitely worth your time. The other honorable mention that I want to give a shout out to is one that I could not find the translation for, but if you speak Portuguese or Spanish or Italian, maybe you can find this in your mother tongue. I'm talking about The Time and Wind by Eric Verissimo. This is a family saga set in the south of Brazil, and it's a historical fiction at its best. It is told in 3 parts. If you don't want to read the whole thing, you don't have to read just the first one. Honestly, the first part, The Continent, is my favorite, and it will just give you a very good idea of that part of the world. What makes up the south of Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina, pretty much all the Italian settlers that went there, and their saga. So another honorable mention is also a historical fiction, and that's The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. And this one is about a cathedral. And if you like architecture, maybe you enjoy this. Now, David Copperfield is number 9 in my list. Number 9 because not because of how much I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it just fine, but it just happened to be that way. It is fairly small in comparison to the other members of this list. It has around 360,000 words, which is not too shabby, if you ask me. But this is Charles Dickens' favorite novel, and it is somewhat semi-autobiographical. We follow the life of the amazing David Copperfield from his birth. We see him throughout his childhood, and this novel can be a little bit melodramatic. I've heard some people say that it feels like a telenovela, and I could agree. Charles Dickens can be a little bit like that sometimes, especially if he's writing in the first person. But that doesn't mean it's not good. It definitely is. Everything is alive in Dickens' world, and everything has a personality and has something to say. So if you feel like reading some Victorian prose or, flexing your muscles in your linguistic chops, check out Charles Dickens' David Copperfield. Now, the last novel that I want to talk about is immense. It has around 750,000 words, but don't let that scare you, because this tale is something to be admired. I'm talking about the tale of Genji, and this is set in a Japanese court a really, really long time ago, but it is full of intrigue and court rivals and emperors and all that good stuff. So if you like that sort of thing, the tale of Genji is definitely a staple in classical literature, especially when we're talking about the ancient world. What was the biggest novel you ever read? Was it good? Was it worth it? Do you know the page count or the word count? Let me know in the comments. And if you have any big novels that you think I'll enjoy, maybe historical fiction or fantasy, let me know. I am always looking for good books. Thank you so much for staying till the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet. Maybe share this video with people who have the same taste as you. Don't forget to check out the community tab. I'm always sharing all sorts of polls, quizzes, videos, all sorts of things. But I think that's it. Thank you so much and happy reading. I'll see you next time. Bye.